Closed meeting of the Shorewood Village Board order at 7:34 p.m. All requests. We're missing it. Who's missing it? We'll hold this up for just a moment. I thought that was her, but it's back to that. Agenda that we'll consider is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda?
So moved.
Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Takes us to item 6. Is there a motion to approve the village board minutes of October 3rd, 2016?
I move to approve the October 3rd, 2016 board minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I have two things. Under number 6, that's the first time. Whenever we reference an item number 5, number 6, it says Trustee Maher requested that the language in item 5C be changed. Can we do one of two things? Can we either in parentheses put the subject that it's dealing with, or maybe just attach the prior minutes to the board comments so we can easily flip back and forth?
Sorry, I think we talked about this last time.
Yeah, we talked about this last time, but putting a title there.
Or the
Yeah, just
agenda item.
The agenda.
Yeah, the topic.
Got it. Okay. We'll start that in the next round.
And then I just had one other insertion under 11B. I had requested that a term sheet containing language that states if the cost per station exceed the original grant proposal submission, the board had the right to reduce the number of stations from 9 to a lower number. I just wanted to know if that could be
In the word in the motion? Oh, it's good.
We did it make it into the motion.
Correct.
It was going to be referred to the motion and or the term sheet. Was that part of the motion? No. Oh, just a request. Put it on the term sheet.
We're going to discuss the term sheet tonight, so you can raise that tonight.
All right.
Any other discussion?
Okay. Under 12B, I reported that I went to a meeting. It was not an official meeting of the Shorewood Foundation. So it was posted by the president of the Shorewood Foundation, but I just wanted to make clear that it wasn't an official meeting of the Shorewood Foundation.
So how would we change that? In
Function.
What would be the language?
Shorewood Foundation function.
Event.
Event.
Fundraiser.
It wasn't a fundraiser. I'm not sure, I don't know that I have the answer, but.
Shindig?
Get together.
Planning.
How about a community meeting?
It was a community meeting organized by the president. Organized by the president. Thank you very much. I knew the group was going to help with.
We got it. Any other comments? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes with the changes that were mentioned here, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, passes. This item is citizens to be heard. This item is for matters that are not on this evening's agenda. Discussion may follow comment on non-agenda items. Or discussion and action may come at future meetings. Is there anybody who wishes to be heard this evening on non-agenda items? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 8, new business. Sub A, public safety. Trustee Rozek, you got 2 items there. First one is consideration of the ordinance to amend the residential congested commuter area parking district. Trustee Rozek.
We discussed this at length in committee, and our recommendation coming out of committee was to hold it in committee for another cycle before we vote. We reviewed the ordinance.
Before we, the committee vote?
Before the committee.
Oh, before the board.
Per the ordinance that we finally got, there are some criteria for documentation that is needed to meet the standard of congestion. 65% of the number of spaces on the street need to be occupied, and 25% of those 65% spaces have to be from non-residents. We were not unable to find documentation for that to meet the standard of the ordinance, so we will hold it over until the chief gets back. There also was a question of a petition, of getting a petition which needs or should have 50% of resident signatures, and we don't have a copy that has that for both streets. So
So I mean, defer it until next.
yep, so when the police gets back, if we don't have those documentations for like 3 days of a week, showing that it is congested and meeting these standards, we just want to make sure that it's congested, meeting the standards in the ordinance, and if so, then move it forward.
I would just comment that in committee, I recommended we move forward. These residents have been waiting since 2010. This thing has been extensively studied by Chief Banasinski. Chief Nimmer has picked it up, rechecked, and he's recommended to the committee to move forward. And I mean, we've met many times, and we had a meeting, the last committee meeting, it was pretty much, we're going forward, and now it's, well, let's look at it some more, so.
Well, I'll make a comment on it because I'm also in that committee, and although I'm pretty sure we're going to pass this going forward, procedurally, we're going to do our due diligence, and we've been told that, first off, the police chief is not here. We don't have the documentation supporting this. If the documentation exists, that's great. It's just difficult to make a decision based on the fact that whenever we do move this residential congested commuter district to the north, we're going to have to answer now to the residents that reside north of you. So that I can feel better about the vote, which again, I'm pretty sure this will also have to ask here, that I would like to at least have documentation that I've been told exists.
So, and just another comment on that. The next street that's going to come in, they're going to want to know what the criteria we used. Today was the first time the committee reviewed the ordinance together and identified the criteria that we need documentation for. So unfortunately, I've only been here since May. It's the first time I got to read the ordinance. And the documents aren't here.
I thought that previous committee and this board approved last year this expansion.
This is the work of capital?
Yeah.
No?
It was only discussed, it was only discussed, but not, yeah, my recollection is we discussed it and it was approved and we didn't implement it because we said we'd wait until fall because over the summer, it's a moot point because you don't miss any session. And that was the driver.
Yeah, it was in your committee.
Yeah,
that
we
you
were
were
in
on
your
the
committee.
committee. This is not-
But I'm saying, I thought it came to this board and the board
It
after.
didn't
No.
come to the board because then Chris and then time needed to talk to that,
The letter's going out. and-
right. So that discussion with the formation of that particular makeup of that committee, yeah, supported the change. And then it went to the village manager to communicate to the businesses in the area to address those concerns. And then the makeup of the committee changed. So it never did come to the board.
Okay.
So that was, the makeup of the committee was different trustees residing on it.
Yeah, but I thought it came to the board as well.
Yeah, it's important.
So what we're looking for is documentation that the residential street is congested. What we've heard on the committee from staff is that they've spoken to some residents, they've sent out some letters. We don't have any documentation of a petition for one of the streets at all, which is in the ordinance. And we also don't have any proof of congestion, meaning in order for a street to be designated, it needs to be 600.
I understand. My understanding was petitions are required if it is a citizen-driven initiative. But if it was a board-driven, and if it came out of the committee because we said, we've heard and we want to do this, that way, that's how the process started, as opposed to petition.
Well, then this is dual then, because one was based on a petition and the other was a letter sent to residents on, what was it, Downer?
I think there's a little bit of both. I thought the issue of the committee was more the documentation of the congestion, not that people decided to not look at it.
So I'm confused. Under the prior committee, was the documentation that's referenced in the ordinance of the 65% and the 25%, was that documentation actually provided to the committee, the prior incarnation of the committee or not?
And that's the question. That's what we're
Just
asking.
verbally, and I don't know if it's things
Is that the fire chief
He supported the prior chief's conclusions, but I don't think he did his full studies as he approached.
Okay.
So I think doing that, it would be easy and have that done within a week. It's done.
So there are people here that came for this purpose. Would anybody like to be here tonight?
Well, I mean,
This is a good time to let out your frustration. You have to give your name and address.
Yeah, I'm Lynn Rothrock. I reside at 4024 North Prospect Avenue.
Thank you.
And I got a petition going because there wasn't enough feedback on our street when the initial letter from Chris went out asking for people who were in favor or against the restricted parking. I went door to door to my neighbors and I got 15 signatures saying that yes, we would like restricted parking. I talked with 20 neighbors. 3 of them said they didn't care either way, and only 1 was really against anything happening. So,
And you reported this to us just
I did.
recently too.
correct, I reported this. So, we've been told that it's going to happen at the next board meeting. A letter went out incorrectly stating which street was going to have restricted parking, and so that was the delay 2 weeks ago why it could not be voted on at that time. So we were told a new letter would go out, which I received. I don't know if Chris got a lot of feedback regarding that second letter, not much.
One for,
What is it?
I had 2 people call.
Okay. So we, in discussing with the various committees, I think with the safety committee 2 weeks ago, they said, oh, this is a done deal, yeah, we're all gonna vote for it. So it's sort of news to us today that it's being held up again, mostly because Chief Nimmer isn't here to talk about the congestion on the street, or there isn't official documentation to indicate such. But I mean, as I've said before, there's constant parking on the street, and it's really hard to drive down the street. Constantly I'm gonna pull over, I'm very congested, hardly any place to park. So we're very much in favor of the restricted daytime parking on North Prospect, just not the Capitol. So I'm just reiterating how much we want this to happen. For 5 years we've been waiting, so whatever you can do, we appreciate it. Thanks.
Anybody else?
I think I was the reference individual against. Hi, Scott Pearl, PURL, I live at 4040 North Prospect. I don't see as much of a parking problem. I know it's hard to drive down the streets and they're very narrow street. But the north half of Prospect, I can always find parking when I always see open parking spaces there. I come and go at different times of the day, at different days of the week. And I don't see the barrier of the 85% congestion being reached. I do see a lot of students parking in the streets, but I don't know how to resolve that without a legislative parking garage on campus. So if the study warrants that there is enough parking, then I'm happy to go along with whatever the study says. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Pearl, can I ask a question? Sure. Your statement, you seem to say you didn't see reason for implementing a change. Do you see reasons against implementing a change?
I think it limits the ability of people to get together during the day, but you can have a kid's birthday party because there aren't enough parking curbs to go around. One of my neighbors has 2 teenagers about to have cars, and so there's going to be more than the 2 parking passes you can have per house. And I don't know if the south end of the street is really busy. There's a parking lot, I think there's only 20 parking spots along the street, so it's not, there's a lot of driveways. I don't know if the apartment building counts as residents of the street or not. For whole purposes,
That's the parking lot next to the canning place?
Yeah, and so they have off-street parking, but they have a lot of visitors themselves. And I mean, frankly, during St. Barbara's Parish Fair is the busiest time I see the street parking for very big weddings, but the rest of the time I can usually find a couple of spots to do. And I have to park my wife's car out of the way to get my car out when I leave my car, so I do look for a parking spot at times. That's your question, sir?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to be
Evening, I'm Andrew Rothrock, I'm also at 4024 Prospect, and I respect the gentleman's comments here. I realize that it does get thinner as you get closer to Jarvis. We did not have an issue with parking for the first maybe 12 years that we lived in the house up until the ordinance was passed on the south side of Capitol. I think most people have heard how that happened. The thing I'd like to say is regarding UWM, previous Chief Manazinski did do a number of studies that he and I went through together where we looked at license plates and where people were coming from and the fact that it wasn't seen to be students, because it wouldn't be too often that there'd be a student that would have 8 hours a day every day that would come and drop off a car. It was people that professionally worked at UWM didn't choose to want to drive over there. So we did have that study done. I can go through my personal emails on how legal that would be, but show anything that I could find on that. Didn't have names, didn't have anything like that, but it was comments from Chief Manazinski, so I would imagine that that would exist in the file. The other thing is, we talked about, well, in the summer it doesn't matter because UWM's out of session. I'll admit it's a little bit later, but UWM professors and people that work year-round still do park there. It really isn't the students. Matter of fact, we can tell on days when there aren't classes because there's 1 or 2 cars not there, but they'll see the other 14 or 15. So I'm frustrated, as is my wife and some of our neighbors that are on the south side here, about trying to tie up police resources to run these license plates again and trying to get some sort of petition that's over 50% of the people. I thought my wife Lynn did a pretty amazing job getting, in very short order, the 15 that she got, and she did accurately report that we did have some people against it, some people who maybe only had 1 car and didn't care. But I just see this going on and on forever. So, very frustrating. Thank you.
Anybody else? Appears to be the thoughts of the committee that this should be deferred until the next meeting from a 2-1 standpoint right now. So we will defer it.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is consideration of approval of the construction management contract with Red Insurance Company for the police building at 4075. I'll just go ahead and make the motion, which is I move to execute the agreement with Red Construction to provide construction management services associated with the Shorewood Police Department
Second.
Discussion?
Just a brief overview of it. This is the contract with our overall construction management. It also identifies the amount that we're going to pay for our architectural services, and it identifies some form of how we're going to pay them upon receipt, monthly or the time frames. So it outlines all the terms. It's a standard form, so when I read it, I think it's what, 150 pages or something. It's pretty long, but it is blank basically, and they achieved all the blanks and felt pretty comfortable with all the terms.
This has been reviewed
He wrote it, he filled in the blanks.
Any other comment? Questions? Seeing none, all in favor, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, passes. That moves us to next item, 8B, Public Works, trustee Amenta. First item under that is review of village road and public bike term sheet for bike share operations.
Yeah, we did have a discussion about the Butler term sheet, which gives sort of the general description of what will be included in the agreement that's now being negotiated between the city of Milwaukee and Butler. So we had some discussion. So are we supposed to, we can either take action approving this, is that correct, or we can wait until the agreement?
This is review only, this doesn't have
This is just
consideration
review
on
and
that.
discussion, okay, so I don't think we can action. I don't know what the other board members would like, if you'd like to hear some of the things we talked about, or if you would just rather go ahead and ask your own questions.
It should be noted, to bring the discussion on the minutes, that the things that trustee Rozak asked was incorporated in here. I know we tried to do that, but they do that. Two things were added because of the discussion last. The rest of them have been there a long time. So the two things are.
I think it didn't word it the same, but it got to the point, it was, I don't know what it talked about. We can decide, based on how much funding we have, we can decide how many stations at that time.
The stations and the locations, and then the other one was what happens if something goes awry and Boulder ceases to exist, where does the cost get eaten of the sort of either finding a new entity to run the system or to take the system down, so we address that question, which Boulder would assume that responsibility, or at the option of the municipality, we would have the option to find another group to run the system if we wanted to continue as well.
Just out of curiosity, why was this not agended for consideration? Did we want to wait, or?
If you want to take action, fine. I think the idea was, and this was provided to give comfort to the board, and some of the comments last time, that there was sufficient agreements in place to address some of the concerns raised. You could approve it or not. There's no hurry for it.
Yeah, when I read it, it sounded like we could ask our questions, maybe get a little more refinement, and then draft the.
Yeah, if you want, I can address that. Basically, when Milwaukee was doing the system, there wasn't this overarching operating agreement because there was only one municipality involved. Now that they're expanding to 3 or 4, all of the municipalities got together in, I think it was February or March of this year, with all the city and village attorneys, and we hashed out what we wanted to see in a final operating agreement, because we're going to have bikes and equipment that's owned by different municipalities or by Butler moving within the system. And we wanted to establish that there was no liability created for the municipality. And we also wanted to establish that there would be no cost to the municipality after the initial purchase of these items. Because, of course, the municipality has to own some of the equipment for a short period of time because we're getting federal funds and grants. So there's some paperwork that we have to handle with that. But we wanted to get together, and we did that. And out of that process, we created this term sheet, and this reflects the ideals or the principles that we want to see drafted into the final operating agreement. Because the municipality is the biggest player, they agreed to draft the final operating agreement that all the municipalities will get.
Milwaukee.
Oh, Milwaukee, I'm sorry, excuse me, I misspoke. Milwaukee agreed to do that. They're now in the process of finalizing that. Because our neighbor, one of our neighboring municipalities that's involved, Wauwatosa, got to the point where they were physically putting stations on the ground, and Milwaukee wasn't finished with the final operating agreement. So they presented this to their city council and said, we're going to direct our city attorney to complete the final operating agreement for consistent with these terms. Because Shorewood's only at the point where we're deciding where stations are going to be located, and we're not as far along as Tosa. We have a little more, the luxury of a little more time, and we don't have to take that step. But we definitely wanted to share, and there's a representative over here tonight, we wanted to share this with the board and with the committee so they understood the direction that we were going. And if there were any concerns or questions, we could incorporate them into the final operating agreement. We've already added a couple of things as a result of that. So when Milwaukee finishes the final operating agreement, it will get presented to the, it will go through committee and get presented to the full board, and then you can take action on that finished agreement.
So you mentioned about Wauwatosa being ahead, but they're ahead because they've got funding from 2 different sources rather than one, right?
That's correct.
And what they've gone ahead with is the funding from the other source, which has to do with, I guess, the rebuilding of the interchange, right?
Correct. It's WISDOT state mitigation money.
Right. So they're not really tapping into, what's that called?
TAP.
Tapping into the TAP grant.
So they'll get there. They've got some other stations they're going to fund that way. Because they had some other things that were being done in the municipality, they had an opportunity to kind of jump ahead of us. It's not that Shorewood's doing anything slowly or dragging the hill. It's just that they had sort of a unique opportunity because of the interchange.
Okay. So where do we go from here then? We want to approve the term sheet at some point?
I think if
But approving the term sheet only gives guidance for the actual agreement that comes later, is that right?
Because of the stage we're in, I think that if everybody's comfortable with where we're going, we can come back when Milwaukee's finished with the final operating agreement for consideration by the full board. And I'm certain that'll be finished before we get to the point where stations are going to be on the ground. So it may be better, you may have more information available to you and be able to do a better job of assessing the operating agreement if you have the full thing rather than just the term sheet.
And then we wouldn't even be considering the term sheet.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
But because this is an open process and we wanted everybody to be up to date on where it's at, the committee certainly wanted to bring it to the full board so everybody got the same information.
Okay. And what's the timing on the full agreement?
I'll look over here.
So that's in the Milwaukee City Attorney's hands. One thing, so there is a draft a near complete draft was circulated between the city attorneys, and West Allis is sick of waiting for Milwaukee, so they're basically just approving the most recent draft is what their plan is. So there are other options if Shorewood doesn't want to wait for Milwaukee.
But the operating agreement really is to tell how things are going to dictate how things are going to run once there's bicycles moving from station.
Right, that's, yeah.
So really, I mean, if we're not to that point yet.
So on the operating agreement, who signs it? The various municipalities and public?
Well, so right now, each operating agreement is going to be between a municipality and Bubbler.
Okay.
I think the envisioning is that at some point in the future, there'd be an intermunicipal agreement to cover some of the other issues that arise because of the moving between. But
I would also assume that there will be future municipalities coming into the act too.
Yep.
Otherwise, we'll never get up to Bay Shore. Yes.
So I just have two questions. For reporting, it's not very specific. It says they're going to provide regular and relevant reporting on network performance. Can we specify like quarterly maybe for the first 2 years, or just so it's more?
And that is spelled out in the agreement I think we can probably share that with the entire board, right, Nathan?
Absolutely,
Okay.
and even in committee tonight, in terms of how up-to-date the information is, you're showing us you literally pull up on the computer and tell literally at any given second where bikes are in the system and tell the system to print a report
Yeah.
on usage, so as frequently as it's reasonable, they can understand that can be created pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, depending on exactly what the metrics are they're agreed to, but we could circulate that, the most recent draft agreement that everyone had agreed to, just that the board can also be seeing that, because it is more detailed in this term sheet, since Shorewood isn't going on the ground this year.
Thank you.
And then my only real other question was, the spot ads on stations, so advertisements on stations, is there anything that details like standards for the signage or for the types of ads, blinking?
Well, and that's something obviously that will be probably different between the municipalities, because different municipalities have different specific rules about that, but in Milwaukee's, there is a section that goes through what the city ordinances cover, what can and can't be advertised. So that is something that we would need input from, what specific Shorewood ordinances cover those things. Nothing we have right now contemplates lights or blinking or anything like that. It's just these 28 by 32 inch like map panel things that you may have seen on the other stations.
And we discussed in committee as well, that would be on the equipment as opposed to a fixture attached.
Correct. It's not going to be some additional, we're not going to mount billboards on top of billboards or anything like that.
And there would be a check by which the municipality would have veto power if they didn't want, for example, liquor advertising or something like that.
Correct. Yeah, and I know Milwaukee already has some of those things for what their ordinances are that are like, no, I don't remember what they were, but it's like no political advertisements and blah, blah, blah. So I'm sure there are different, that's something that will likely be different between some of the municipalities in terms of what specifically is allowed or not.
Anybody else have
I just want to say that people have expressed great concern about riders using bubble without helmets, and the issue that has come up at Ped and Bike Safety of senior citizens being concerned about people over the age of 12 riding on the sidewalks. And Bubler did represent that they have a picture of the helmet and saying, tell us what.
On the like dashboard section of each bike, we have a sticker, and on the one side it says something about wear a helmet, not the law, but a good idea. Then it says don't ride your bike on the sidewalk, and it has our customer service number. And in our terms and conditions, what you have to accept to check out the bike, the individual agrees to abide by all local, state, and federal ordinances and laws, or something to that effect.
I mean, it might be worth, because that is, I don't know if it's the ordinance in Milwaukee, but that is by ordinance in Shorewood, that isn't the same in Milwaukee.
Well, I actually think all 4 municipalities have a slightly different age. I think some are 12, some are 14, and some are 16 for the age at which children can no longer ride on the sidewalk. So that one's a little strange because it's so variable.
But they all have a limit.
They all have, you're correct, yeah. And we do have it right on the bike that says don't ride on the sidewalk.
And I would imagine that most riders, if there's kids involved in the group, they're with parents too, or with older people. I mean, you don't have 12-year-olds renting.
Unless they're tall enough. I mean, they're larger
Well,
bikes.
per our agreement, you're not supposed to be on the bikes unless you're 14 or older.
Okay.
But,
All right.
so in Shorewood, everyone that's on the bike should be in the street.
Right. Any other comments?
What happens after 10, the useful life of the equipment's 10 years?
Well, that's the depreciation. I actually think the oldest system is now only 10 years old, so. And the bikes are depreciated over 5 years. They're actually warranted for, the frame and forks actually warranted for 5 years, so I expect that they will actually last substantially longer than that, because I can take a frame or a fork today that I've had for 3 years and mail it back to Trek, but it's got a crack on it and they send me a new one. So that's like the 5-year warranty. That's just what the depreciation is based on, like more along the lines of like, if you look up what you should depreciate something of this over, it's not necessarily what we anticipate the useful life to be per se.
So you're expecting a rolling replacement of these units, so you get on a fairly level?
Yeah, well, and the stations are very modular, so they only are warranty for 1 year, so there will always be like little parts that need to be replaced on the stations, and we undertake pretty proactive protection. They're stainless, or they're galvanized steel with powder coating on them, but they still rust with all the salt, and we undertake pretty aggressive preventative maintenance, cold galvanizing and respray painting whenever we find rust, so we are hoping that they will last for a good long time. But we do replace little parts as they wear out, and we've been doing that since things started.
What happens if you're not going out of business, but the village wants to take out one of the stations due to complaints or whatever it may be, safety becomes an issue because more things happen around it. Is that our cost then?
Well, as Nathan pointed out, it's in your right of way. You can do whatever you want. you can revoke our permit to be there.
It's in the right of way at our pleasure.
Yeah.
The municipality's pleasure. Take it out, take it out.
Yes. We would hope to have those cooperative discussions about those things, but.
Okay, any other comments? So what's going to happen, I believe, is we're going to wait for the actual agreement to, for an agreement, who's going to prepare the agreement? Would that be you or you in conjunction with Butler?
Well,
because that's an agreement between Shorewood and Butler, correct?
Well, I guess the framework upon which all of the other municipalities will hang their hat essentially is the one that's being developed right now.
Oh, with the 800-pound gorilla?
Right, with Milwaukee. What we will do is, for example, like the clauses related to advertising, the standards that we want to develop for that, and the issues related to what our ordinances say about what age can be, and whatever individual things that apply to Shorewood, we will adapt. But generally, we're just waiting for that sort of structure to come from Milwaukee. And it also helps, as we discussed, if all municipalities are generally operating under the same basic agreement because of the way that the system is all stuck together.
So once Milwaukee's agreement is written, that'll be the trigger point for us to get an agreement.
Absolutely, and they're going to circulate that through.
Well, to that, honestly, the little things that Milwaukee's like tinkering with now might be some of those very things that Shorewood just want to do their own way, because a lot of it's like the specific like costs or the specific reporting provisions, things like that. And obviously, you don't want to be generating 12 different sets of reports, but as long as they're reports that we can easily generate, we don't care if they're a little bit different between different municipalities, or if Shorewood asks for a little bit more and we give a little bit more to everyone, or like things like that. So I think we could. Do you have that latest copy, Nathan? Okay, well I'll send Nathan the most up-to-date one, because maybe that's where you want to go from that, because that one's pretty close to done. So I can share that with Nathan, and he can share it with the rest of the trustees.
So you can take that and
Absolutely.
turn it into a Shorewood Butler agreement?
Absolutely.
But we did want to make sure that there was general consensus on these broad overarching terms before Nathan does it anymore.
What's the time frame when we're looking for 9 stations in Shorewood? Whatever the amount is.
That'd be an R.A. Smith question. Hopefully next spring, but
Next spring is kind of a goal.
that's when I would like to be there. But
Okay.
I thought it was July.
it's probably July. Probably really be August.
At this point, not having an agreement in place is not holding anything up.
Correct, after the last meeting where R.A. Smith got the approval to move forward with those sites.
It would be good to know what that date is. At what point will not having an agreement hold us up? Because then maybe right before that point, we can say, what's hanging up in Milwaukee, maybe it's not our issue. Let's go ahead and make our agreement so we can not lose any time because of their decisions.
Well, we haven't had an operating agreement in Milwaukee, so it doesn't theoretically need to hold anything up. But obviously, right. I said, well, we still don't have the operating agreement in Milwaukee.
We'd like to get it before we get
right. So it doesn't necessarily need to hold anything up, but I think.
Yeah, we already have stations on the ground.
Well, they do have like a one-page term sheet that just says we're insuring the stations, basically.
But the reason it came up is because Tulsa got to the point where they were putting it out, they said, well, okay, let's circulate the term sheet back.
But I think for sure you would want to have it by the time stuff is going to be on the ground. I don't think it would hold anything up more with moving other stuff forward unless R.A. Smith says that they want that before they continue, but that would be more of what their preference is.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. That means item 2, yeah, still with you, trustee
We
Amistad.
have continued discussion of refuse collection, one of our favorite topics. So is that Mark or Leanne? Mark, right?
All right. Based on our last meeting on the topic, staff will give us some additional materials for you to kind of weigh over. The packet tonight includes a cover sheet from Public Works Director Bushwick. I never know. Really, it just summarizes again the 3 primary alternatives for service levels that are being presented in all the comparative data. Also, at the previous meeting, the board had asked to have a kind of a written outline of how staff put together the estimated municipal cost of the current process. So I've done that as well. Also includes some information from the costs that were not built into that village estimate. And then another couple paragraphs that relate to potential cost savings and the fact that should the board choose to outsource all of these services, it's not 100% cost savings. There's still going to be some residual costs that will be redistributed to other service areas. Then we've got some numeric pages. Option 1, best price based on bidding with the assumption that all services would be outsourced, or at least all primary household refuse and household recycling services. We developed a kind of a comparative grid change from current to help the board evaluate the potential costs or savings associated with each change of service level. That being from automated to the current service level to enhanced alley, and then the other primary change contemplated for service levels is whether to do bi-weekly or weekly recycling collections. Also based on the previous meeting, the board asked for a little additional information on some of those what staff calls second-tier services. Things like school and municipal refuse pickup, street and park can collections, big yard waste pickup costs, brush collections, pickup and disposal costs, as well as some of the bulk item pickups that are what we call second tier for our analysis. So we have included that.
Are these dollar amounts? This is annual, is that correct?
Correct. These are all annual amounts. The service level may be done weekly or monthly, but the amounts are all annualized.
Okay.
And Mark, is it correct to say, for this one, contracting out, that's why?
Are you in option 1 right now?
Yeah. Okay, so this is service, all of our services out, except for keeping school and these things, other costs here. So you have to add those 2 numbers together, is what I'm saying.
So again, the primary decision is what to do with the household collections. And then based on that decision, there are some secondary decisions that can be made. So we've given you the information just to illustrate how those
Costs are currently
compare.
Okay, but so everyone understands, and if I understand correctly, in order to figure out the total cost right now, you would add, in your first column, you have to add 446,268 plus 175,300.
same thing for,
If the board's deliberation was whether or not to contract all services out, I would agree with that statement, but right now the discussion, as I understand it, was whether or not to contract out primary household collections, and then this is supplemental information. So if you're gonna go, Public Works is completely out of collections, that statement would be absolutely correct.
but in order to do the savings, say for bi-weekly, they've actually included 2 of the school and refuse and street and park collection in their estimates, so that those costs go away. So you kind of have to do both.
It's the additional information that gives you the ability to make those judgment calls, right?
So it's not shown necessarily what the total savings would be for these 2 things in each quadrant.
And the total savings is predicated on the board decision, correct? So we've done that for each of the 3 service level options as far as where the refuse and recycling is collected, as well as the alternative for weekly recycling pickups. So that's all the option 1 metrics. And then let me just touch on option 2, and then the back page, and we'll go back to more detailed questions. Option 2 assumes the best price overall with the willingness to split the contract up between the village doing services and outsourcing recycling. As it works out, for reasons that we discussed in the narrative on the 3rd page of this, the village cost of collection is consistently been the low cost analytically. So then the question becomes, how do you want to contract out for recycling costs, weekly, bi-weekly, and what collection method do you want to use? Right in the center of the option 2 page is what we call the status quo bid. If the board decides to maintain current practices, that will be the cost to do that in 2017 or potentially part of 2017 and going forward.
The question.
Yes.
I'm reading this page,
Which page?
the option 2
Are there
page.
page numbers on this?
No, I apologize, there are not.
I can't figure
I
out.
put headers on, but it's option 2. It's the second numerical page.
And if you explain this, I apologize. When you, oops. Hold on. Okay, so cost change from current, that line, you follow it across and it says a savings of 90,191, and then in bold, and then next to it there's a 13,135 number. What's that second number that's not bolded? And there's this like the second column.
Yeah, thank you. I was working up to that.
Oh.
Again, in the evaluation, staff has put together a set of assumptions on what it would mean to village operations provide various different service levels. And then added that to the outsourced contracts for recycling rather, and you come up with these primary totals, which are the bolded numbers. But I felt it was also important to illustrate what the change was strictly to the recycling contract from one year or one option to the next. So that's what the italic numbers are that are not bolded. That's strictly just the recycling differences for those levels. And the reason that we do that again, it's challenging to give you costs and then to say, well, if we don't do it, are we really going to save all these costs? But the idea, again, was to provide the information to the board that shows you the comparative change in cost and service level to do the various options so that you can weigh those costs or service level efforts to your choice of what service level and option you want to undergo.
Can I just remind the board that the last time we talked about it, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we decided that full automation, we still wanted the information to know how much we potentially could save, but that because of issues of getting people on alleys getting their garbage to the curb, that full automation was really not one that we wanted to see the data, but we're not really considering that option.
Yeah, I wasn't at that meeting, so that's really helpful.
And again, if that's the board's general trend, we can drop that for future analysis.
Well, and I recall saying, well, we don't really want to do that, but we wanted to see what the impact of making that decision was financially. So I just want to remind that that's.
And that's one of the primary reasons that we've tried to present this data.
Was for also contracting out was off the table as well, but you want to see it, or was it just going out?
Automation under either scenario is off.
Yeah.
It's not desired by the board.
Automation meaning everything at the curb and everything in the cart, so that you could have a big truck just go.
Although there were some board members that weren't here, so.
Well, my recollection is the discussion that we had was back when Leanne and staff was preparing the request for proposals, and we were talking about all these different options and how to structure the request for proposal. And we had a lot of discussion about alley service and no alley service, and that's when we received the report from the consultant. And it was the consensus of the board that we were not interested, and we did not want to eliminate alley service for solid waste. So therefore, because we didn't want to eliminate alley service for solid waste, that automatically eliminated full automation. It wasn't that we're against full automation, it was that we wanted to continue to provide solid waste pickup services in the alley.
Okay, but there was a meeting in the summer that I was not available for. Was there anybody else who was not there? Okay.
And then, like trying to provide, on the last page of this section, staff has made an effort to try to quantify the impact on a household benchmark level, showing the cost of services and cost of resources to a typical $300,000 home, which is a customary benchmark for those types of things, in dollars per year per house. And it shows the distribution of those service level decisions in that metric. It also shows...
So talk about the first one. I just want to make sure I understand. The 9292, the 9896, not applicable.
Right.
Okay, what does that mean? Current cost of what?
Current service level cost, which is...
Of what? Waste?
Of all?
Both garbage pickup and recycling pickup?
Correct. And that would be all the numbers on the left side of both options. Just household recycling pickup and household revenues. Not the secondary services, just the household collections.
So right now the average home is paying $93 a year for garbage and recycling pickup.
Correct.
And disposal.
And what?
And that including disposal.
The whole, right?
Okay.
Yes. Contract, right? I wanted to ask that. Okay, we also
Yes.
do disposal.
Well, we contract, we pay somebody to dispose, right? So the disposal contracts you see in the public works budget.
And is that
applies to both.
$93 for disposal?
That's $93 per household today. However, when we go to a new contract, because we've been seeking extensions on our current waste management recycling contract, the new contract, based on their replacement bid, will change that cost to $98.96.
And what's the 9896 that's based on?
That's current services, status quo, with the new rates for waste management programmed in.
Okay, so that's status quo.
Yes.
All right.
Then to the right side, we tried to summarize again, you know, from the perspective of the homeowner, what could be perceived as having to do more or less for their pickup and collection services. So full automation would require people with alleys to take everything down to the street. That's more work than they currently do. Current service level is the same, and an enhanced alley would allow them to have their refuse picked up in the alleys and not have to take it to the curb for those who have alleys on their properties. And that would be less.
How would
But
it be
you
less
can't
and not the
split it.
same? Unless
Yeah, why is that? Why is it?
Because under the enhanced alley service level, refuse and recycling are collected from alleys.
But why is that a difference?
Because right now, if you live on an alley, your recycling is collected curbside.
So you have to take it to the curb. The presumption is it's easier to access at an alley.
I'm just asking why it's more expensive to do enhanced alley service, meaning you can take both of yours to the alley.
Because it's more difficult for people to operate in an alley. It's not as efficient, there's not as much room, you have to use some more vehicles.
Okay, and you have the choice under enhanced alley of whether you want, as a resident, I know I read that.
No, if you live on an alley, everything will be collected from the alley. It's not optional.
From the enhanced alley options, so there's no option, okay? I do have some technical questions on that.
Sure.
I just have some clarity on the status quo services too. I mean, we are making a change in that you can't, everything has to be in a bin or a cart, so.
That is correct.
Okay, so it's just so everyone understands the status quo means.
Both of those things.
And that is primarily an efficient, well, there's twofold really, it's an efficiency measure. It is also in large part, it's an aesthetic measure.
Mark, are you done with your presentation?
That's kind of
Okay,
where we're at. We can go from there.
okay, so I just have a few technical questions and
Sure.
then, and then more policy driven, but, so currently we have 3 trucks and 1 person in each truck, is that correct? So it's not 2 people staffing the truck?
Correct.
Just 1, and all of the trash collection is done by these individuals for under 15 hours a week? That's what,
3 trucks, 3 routes,
5 hours each,
5 hours each, 3 days a week.
so,
Yes, 15 hours a truck.
so this seemed low to me, but maybe that's, because I'm not familiar with our garbage collection.
15 hours per individual.
Per individual. Okay. Okay. Yeah, per truck. Then my other one was, go ahead, Alex, I have more, but I want to add.
The costs that you present in our tables reflect the increase in landfill tipping fees. I mean, on the last page, you showed the cost per household, but the total cost in all the other charts reflects that new increased cost.
The total cost for all outside contracts reflects those costs, yes.
But no, for where we have on these 2 pages, where you show Shorewood costs,
There,
household refuse by.
Shorewood costs are based on current costs.
Okay. Are based on current costs. So we know that then, that it's going to be more than 446, 268, because we know the rate's going up. A little bit.
Well, you know, and this is the challenge, it's that if people don't throw as much garbage away, then that compensates
and that's-
20-fold for
that's
that little
And that's my
change
next
in
question.
rate.
Actually,
Yeah.
all these costs, I mean, these are best.
They're statistical averages and they're based on current.
Our costs, whether it's us continuing to collect and have the stuff hauled to a landfill.
But these are based on numbers from 2015, right?
16.
But going forward, whether it's us doing the garbage collection or we subcontract that out, the cost will be actual cost based on tonnage.
That's correct. Nobody guaranteed anything, right? It's just tonnage plus, and we used those quotes and we converted everybody to a standard comparative metric based on 5-year averages.
And I think I asked this last time, but if we were to choose going outside for solid waste services,
Which option are you talking about?
on any option, on any
Well, it's option 1.
I'm
Option 1 is the only one that contemplates outsourcing solid waste.
clear on that.
Okay, option 1, if we do go outside for solid waste, we still would have some expense for replacing trucks.
That's correct.
Because we would, if we're going to assume we're going to continue picking up brush and yard waste.
Well, and leaves, right?
That depends to some extent on the service level option that you choose, because when we look at simply refuse and recycling as our base services, the household refuse and recycling services, we, for your review, listed in that chart the vendor that provided the lowest price for those services. In some cases, that vendor will not offer yard waste services. But at a different service level, a different vendor may offer those yard waste services. So you see, this gets to be very tangled, which is why we've really tried to keep steering this discussion back to just refuse and recycling, because those are the big dollar ticket items.
And just to add to that, the only scenario that is not bid for yard waste or brush is under full automation with advanced. Every other bid does have those services. Now again, it's another policy decision whether you want municipal staff to do that or to outsource it, and then that will impact the number of trucks that need to be acquired and what type of vehicles need to be acquired, which is not to be lost on the discussion is your decisions impact the type of vehicles we need to order and get replaced before the other one's completely.
The decision on recycling of bi-weekly versus weekly, is that something that can change once we're into the contract period? I mean, does that need to be decided now and can't be changed until the next contract period is up?
I guess it's you'd have to renegotiate.
As they say, anything's negotiable.
Yeah, because it strikes me as one of the things, and I know we can't, when we try to take this discussion of service levels and put dollars attached to it and do some comparables, there's so many assumptions built in that I don't know that this is the best way for us to make.
Well, again,
purely based on the dollars. But my point is, this data doesn't, when we look at comparing weekly, bi-weekly recycling to weekly recycling, one of the things that this cost, the whole cost, the solid waste cost doesn't reflect is the possibility, and we would hope the likelihood, that our solid waste tonnage is going to go down as we do more recycling. If we go from bi-weekly recycling to weekly recycling, I would hope, I would expect, and I think data from other places proves to be the case, that recycling volume goes up and solid waste volume go down, so then our solid waste disposal costs go down, but there's no way we can
Well, we could probably figure out where you break even. I imagine we could.
No, we don't.
But then if we adopt organics too.
Which is the next part of the discussion is, and that's not, that's not even something we're contemplating here, but I'm going to bring it up as a point for future discussion, is the notion of additional composting of organics.
Right, we did get information on some of those additional services that were suggested that we look at. But again, those are monetarily just issues that I would recommend that we resolve after we make the two primary decisions of service level and weekly versus bi-weekly. That gets us determine what kind of equipment we need, further discussions on second tier issues and then kind of keep the ball moving forward. Because they're all
do have that information.
Yeah.
Was Waste Management a bidder on these and they just weren't low bidder on anything?
Right.
Thank you.
So I have two sets of questions.
Sure.
Maybe just the technical ones, and then I want to go expound on what Paul probably, I don't know what he decides wants to say, but, so the technical questions I have are, what uses do our garbage trucks do right now besides refuge collection?
Those are primarily those second set of data points.
Where are you? Secondary services?
On option one, the secondary services below the totals, the second set of totals that you referred to earlier,
Okay, so like school and
No.
municipal?
No.
well, those are by truck, right? By
No,
pickup.
those are done by
Where are you
contract.
reading from? I don't know what you're
Yeah, they're
saying,
not.
Mark.
Okay, so page.
We're looking at option one, and we're reading off the left side is below the household refuse numbers.
Okay, recycling by WM all,
Below that, yeah.
recycling rebates?
Next
No,
one.
school and municipal refuse.
Municipal
Right.
refuse.
So
street and park.
if we already contract out for that, right,
That's
we
part
already
of our
use a truck
truck
for that, okay. Street and park can collection,
Yes,
we use trucks, okay? Bagged area waste.
yes.
Garbage trucks. So we're 3 garbage trucks. Rust collection.
That is one of our trucks. It is not one of the roll-outs that we use for refuse and curbside
It's a
recycling.
different truck, is it?
It's a different truck.
Okay, and then bulk item pickup
Different truck.
and special pickup, is that bulk item? Okay, so the only things
What about
that,
leaves? What do we do with leaves?
That is a different truck.
Different truck.
and that's important to me to just know, you know, if we, what vehicles we would need to maintain certain services if we outsource to others. So that's very helpful, thank you. Special pickups, we do that, right? We don't contract out?
Correct.
And that's this other cost?
That really would be a, and correct me, Mark, if I'm wrong, that's a wash in a sense.
Oh, okay,
Because those are fee for services. Now, we do those by appointment and that's a request, so there's an additional fee to the resident to receive that service.
Okay,
But it's,
And it would be passed through, it would be a pass-through cost,
right.
if we were to.
but you know, I would just add again, our focus is on service level efforts. So, but yes, from a budgetary
Okay, just
perspective,
budget.
that's neutral.
Thank you. These are all my technical questions.
Sure.
Okay. The equipment cost, at first you mentioned that it's $25,000, wait, in the savings. So it's in your text part.
Mhm.
Where do you read that?
I'm finding it. Hold on for 1 sec. Okay. I guess
On the
it's
third page, it's the second last paragraph.
I don't know what the third page is.
The one that says starts with not included in village cost estimates on the top.
Okay, so a potential cost savings for the 3 vehicles is $25,000 per vehicle per year. So I get $75,000 a year if you got rid of all 3 trucks.
Now, the potential cost savings for equipment depends on whether the board is willing to outsource every last service.
Right. Okay, so, but it says the savings if you outsource everything would be $25 per year. In our
If you
calculation.
outsource household refuse, because we would still need the remaining equipment cost to do the second-tier services.
Right, but when you estimated the calculation going into our current village services, you know, that status quo, you estimated $54,500 annual cost for the equipment.
Mhm.
So why are they different?
This is due to the fact that the useful life of the equipment will also likely be extended, which will reduce their per vehicle cost over time. That's right following the note on the 25,000. So if the vehicles last longer, their cost over time goes down because they're not being used as much.
Okay, so the savings would, if we didn't have the vehicles, how do we save $75,000?
You don't.
I'm just reading here, about $25,000 per year per vehicle.
Okay, okay, I see what the The intent is to suggest that you're not going to eliminate all the vehicles, that unless the board decides to outsource all refuse and yard waste services, that at least 2 vehicles will be necessary, because you can't just have 1 vehicle. So therefore, what I meant to say is that if you outsource household waste, you may be able to save $25,000 per year on vehicle costs from the total village equipment cost estimates that were previously calculated.
But the total estimates for equipment is 56, so I don't, which one are we under or over projecting? I'm just worried that if the total cost for 3 vehicles...
Well, the total vehicle cost on the preceding page is $68,520 for all services.
For all the refuse vehicles, so 3 vehicles, correct?
That's correct.
So for 3 vehicles, it's, say that again?
$68,520. It's about this far on the page.
On which page?
The one that starts out with village refuse cost analytics. The first page under the cover memo.
I'm just talking about, if you look at the 3rd bullet point, annual acquisition cost. I mean, that's the cost you're assigning a yearly cost to the 3 refuse trucks, including your financing costs, your life, your usage. But if we didn't use those 3, we'd be saving potentially 75. So I don't know.
No, it's equipment costs include operating and maintenance costs. They're not isolated. Okay, they're combined because depending on how you use the equipment changes the variables.
But wouldn't that make this number higher?
I'm sorry.
The 54,500?
Again, this is analytics on the status quo as an example for the methodology staff used to come up with those numbers. It's not necessarily every permutation that the board could possibly decide on.
I can talk to you afterwards, just so
Okay.
I don't waste everyone's time. It's just remember, the 2 I think should be the same. Your annual acquisition cost or your annual savings for that equipment.
But if you're, the suggestion is that if you're $68,520 for total equipment costs, but now you're going to only use 2 vehicles or 2 pieces of equipment doing less services,
And you can save,
you can save a third of equipment costs, which is $18,000, and some operating costs, which is another
well,
7.
50. You've got
We can,
okay, we'll read it.
yeah, I think we can
Okay.
clarify that in the background, yeah.
That sounds good. And for staff time, for cost reductions, you would still need, so there's 3 truck drivers that collect refuge, and you would only be able to eliminate 1. So what are the other drivers, what are their other duties?
Well, the combined time that the 3 drivers spend on household refuse is 2,340 hours a year. So by eliminating that service, the implication is you could eliminate 2,340 staff hours, which is about 1 FTE, 2,080 hours.
So the other 2 then, without refuge collection?
Not with vacation and sick time and everything
Well,
else.
I acknowledge
More
that,
like
but
1850 or something.
But those costs are built actually into the benefit costs that's allocated to staff. So they are embedded. But that again, that's why staff is saying it's a 1 full-time position. If that was the board's direction.
Would we have enough work, I just want to know about the workload. Would we have enough work if we eliminated refuge collection for the remaining 2 FTE?
That would not be an issue.
Okay, because they do,
Well, right now, the refuse collectors typically on their route days, which is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, spend approximately 5 hours doing household waste.
okay.
The remaining 3-ish hours are yard waste on those days. On Thursdays, 2 of the drivers do the special pickups. The 3rd is assigned to the chipper,
Special pickups?
the bulk
We do it
item
ourselves?
collection. Yes.
We don't contract that out, okay.
And then on Fridays, 1 of them will do street cans, and any garbage that might have been missed because someone put it out late or we just missed it. Then the remaining 2 generally are assigned to other tasks. Oftentimes it's street work, asphalt patching, sometimes they'll go on forestry crew. It really depends on what the pressing item is that week.
So this kind of was in there when it said how many FTEs or what side. I'm not sure where you're going into this kind of detail, Trustee Wilson. It's mind-boggling to me.
I just want to know,
It's absolutely mind-boggling.
if we outsource everything, I'm just trying to figure out how many of the staff people remain, what those duties are.
Are you hoping that you can find some increased savings somewhere, or that the staff wouldn't have?
Well,
I'm just wondering where you're going with this detail.
I would like to see recycling stepped up. So I'm trying to get my questions answered to see if I don't want a huge impact on the budget by adding services. I'd like to make a decision to know if we can reduce costs another way, so that I feel comfortable about adding a benefit to the residents.
But that's not reflected in the proposed costs on the following pages? I'm not challenging you, I'm just helping, to help me understand how it's not currently reflected.
Because we're gonna have to decide on yard waste and on some other things. And so if these staff members, if you know what the staff members are doing, you have a better idea of how many you'd have to keep if you've outsourced everything for various contracts.
The other consideration is of maintaining the minimum level of staffing for winter and other emergency operations.
I have a question on the third page, comparative tables, the split services. So it looks like, so the very last one.
This page, Trustee Rose, or Trustee Monte?
Comparative tables.
Yes?
Yeah, the last one, okay. So in splits, option 2, split services, so we could do, just to continue what we're doing now, is $98.96.
It might be more.
And we could go to weekly for $98.54. We can do weekly recycle under enhanced alley
That's correct.
for about the same. Okay. So then my question was, okay, enhanced alley split is, I'm trying to get back to the first table and look at, would there be savings in secondary services if we did the split, enhanced, so the village kept garbage, we do enhanced alley, village keeps garbage, and then we go with John's.
Those
And so,
other additional services in option 1 are only available to be outsourced if it's in conjunction with household refuse contract. So on the
okay,
split
so there's
services,
no
those issues,
there'd be no additional savings.
those were not bid out to be outsourced separately.
That's where they go with it.
Okay, so
That's
John,
why they're
so-
not on the
okay,
second.
okay, so if John's, for us to get to that $98 number for enhanced alley split, that would be with which contractor would we do that
Staying the
with?
same, you're saying staying the same cost, but
I'm not looking at-
9854,
Yes, the 9854.
that is the enhanced alley with weekly recycling contracted out. The village would do current contract costs, John's would do recycling,
Okay,
but I caution
okay,
again,
that's,
that
okay.
the change in the village cost does not represent a cash savings, because there's some built-in costs for,
What do you mean cash savings? It's an increase of 26,859, right? What savings are you talking about?
the increase in the recycling bid is $64,913, which is offset by a reduction of village service level effort that has to be put into the collections in that area.
Okay,
And again, with the assumptions here, we do figure in administrative costs for context, and that's the $85,000 that's noted on the previous page, that is just, doesn't disappear with this. So I just want to be very clear, and I don't want to mislead. I mean, I think I see where you were hoping to go, but that's reflects service level. It's not cash because some of those service levels will be redirected to other areas.
Okay, but you know, on your tax impact on the home, I mean, I'm relying on that number that you're saying, I mean, I'm interpreting this, and tell me if this is wrong, that we could go to weekly recycling, split service, so we keep village staff, the village still collects refuse, the village still does brush, the village still does leaves, the village still does special pickups, all that stuff. We just have Johns come in to do recycling, and they come weekly. And that's, you know, basically a little bit of an increase from where we are, but basically where we are. Is that right?
Well, the increase for the recycling contract is at $64,913, change from those services from our existing contract.
What is this now, $64.19?
$64,913.
That's the page before.
The bottom right number on the option 2.
Okay.
Now, we already, and again, if I could make this simple, I would. But we also know that regardless of what we do, our recycling costs are going to go up $29,156.
Right.
So status quo, just do what we're doing, re-sign on the dotted line, and
But option 2, is this correct to say, going on a $300,000 house with split services, so exactly what we provide today, with a different recycling contract, enhanced alley and weekly recycling is $98.54 per household?
that is the cost of service to provide those services.
So it's basically the same. She's saying we could go to weekly
It is, but I just want the board to understand that that's the cost of services being provided to make those collection activities. Administrative costs are built into this summary. Equipment costs are built in. Not all that goes away just because you move that. It's just those costs get shuffled off to other service areas. And that's the 85,000 number that I tried to put into context in the
We haven't
narrative.
changed anything. The village is still collecting in alleys or in the village portion does not change at all. All we're changing is, under this one, is a different contractor for recycling and going weekly instead of bi-weekly, correct?
No. Carts, it's only carts.
Well, it's a cart, and again,
Okay, go
the
ahead.
amount of time that staff is being estimated to complete these tasks has changed, which is why the reduced cost. But that doesn't, again, that doesn't mean that all the overhead
But
and,
the overhead and fixed cost is in the 9896 and it's in the 9854, correct?
correct.
Yes.
They're in there. Okay, that's just, because it looks to me like we can, you know, with a minimal increase, we can go weekly. I just want to be sure that that's a correct conclusion.
I think that John's bid for weekly recycling was a very good bid.
That, I understand. I think if you eliminate numbers entirely and just say what we're paying now is X, you know, X, for our current service level for the village to provide weekly refuse and a contractor to provide bi-weekly recycling, that cost right now is X. Under this chart, I think what Trustee Ament is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that based on this, it looks as if we were to change to the village would continue to provide weekly refuse collection, and we would change to weekly recycling collection by a contractor
John's.
in the alley, that cost would be X plus a very nominal amount.
Yes. Comparatively.
So you save, if I'm reading this, option 2, best price, enhanced alley. The village saved with the carts in the alley. You save $38,000 on the refuge collection because you got the carts and everything's in the cart. And you use that savings then for the increase the weekly recycling, which closed up.
It was almost a lot.
It's a pretty big deal. Yeah, I was surprised to see that.
Me too.
Plus, we got a lot of carts to buy.
Well,
Yeah.
That was included in their bid.
That's a good question. I mean, what's different? And then why does the village go from 318,848 down by that 38,000?
More efficiency, carts only, no outside items.
we talked about that.
Okay, outside growth, okay. I don't see
We did a lot of extra stuff.
I mean, it's not a, I mean, it's not a, 318 to 280 is, you know, 38,000, but.
Enough time for recycling.
But again, that's not a cash savings, it's a resource and time savings. It's not an actual budget reduction in our annual budget. It's
Because they're going to keep the people and keep the equipment out. So I don't
Well, no, not so much that
understand
we keep all the equipment, but we can't eliminate 100% of those costs with that switch, because a certain amount of those factors are built into the different dispersions of overhead and equipment costs and, you know, things of that nature,
But
so.
all this is changing is the recycling contract.
And the assumptions of
And putting it on
equipment and efficiency for collection.
I think that 280 number 794 is not right. I think it should stay the same as 318.
Trustee Zobek.
I think one of the things that we're seeing, and I know that's one of the challenges that you had in trying to simplify all this, is that there's just so many variables. And not only are there so many variables are variable in terms of which variables matter. I think, I would like to suggest that perhaps contemplate that this information answers the questions that we had asked. We said, you know, we don't want to have this kind of service. This is the service level we want. But just tell us what the costs are for this other stuff that we don't want, just so we know the cost of our decisions. And I think we can clearly see that here, maybe not in exact budgetable dollars, but certainly in relative terms. I think maybe more importantly is to talk about what we want to do from a service level standpoint. What do we want to do from a service level? Do we want to have alleys, streets, carts, outside services, inside the cart, etc.? And then we can see what the costs are. As well, I think that from a long-term environmental behavioral change standpoint, I think, and I think what I'm hearing a couple people say is that we're interested and we'd like to go for more frequent recycling. We can get more recyclables. Hopefully, it'll drop our the solid waste tonnage. That's good for lots of reasons. And I think, at least from my standpoint, whether it's $98.54 or $98.37, quite frankly, it doesn't matter.
As long as they're similar.
As long as
If
they're
aren't similar, then.
as long as they're as similar as they can be. And I think we could spend a lot of time throwing different spins on different scenarios, and these numbers might change. But I think what this is, at least it's consistent enough to be comparable, given a couple of the points that we made as possible exceptions. And I would suggest we focus more on what do we want our service level to be, given that there's these range of costs. And I think it was, when Trustee Menta points out that, and thank you for telling us it's not cash savings, but looking at the difference of our status quo with increased tipping fees and what the costs are to essentially go from the status quo to the enhanced alley service with weekly recycling. We can see those costs are comparable. And I mean, I think we should focus. I would like us to focus the discussion that way, as opposed to trying to recreate all these numbers and redo every possible scenario.
Trustee McKay?
What is our goal tonight with this discussion? Are we looking to give some direction?
direction and what information additional, if any.
Trustee Rosie?
So that brings me to my policy question. So I had some discussions with other people that we all know, and
I don't know.
just people in the village, residents, people like that. But anyways, my big question is, if we are talking about level of service, my hope would be we could see the global picture of, well, if you increase costs for recycling, say, because that's what we're trying to promote as a green and sustainable community, can you provide me with an option for how to then increase revenue? So for instance, in the bigger picture, how do you modify behavior? Like, do we charge for the weight of the garbage? You know, like to offset the costs so we can have more recycling? So it's the program in general is where I'd love to focus attention to, but not ignoring the cost. So what is our goal? What's our vision? Which is, I think, and I could be wrong, but that it's to promote green and sustainability in our community. And then how do we, these are going to be long-term contracts, and service decisions. Did we look at other ways to structure our programs to increase recycling, increase reuse, increase composting in order to save the money on the waste side? Bins is one, getting rid of the bins is one way because you're providing more space for recycling.
Not ordering from Amazon would be one way, so you have all the cardboard
Right.
settings.
So anyways, but how do you reduce the weight on the waste side then? And what mechanisms have we researched to do that?
That was not the test book before us.
So I remember the Conservation Committee provided a really great document when we started this conversation about incentivizing. And I think, I don't know, my recollection is that we felt like we needed to get this worked out first. And I would like to say that staff did an amazing job with, putting this in a meaningful format financially. So I don't know. I guess we would have to ask where we would go with, if we would go back to those
You
policies.
talked about having miniature carts and charging, you've done, and it went practical,
At this time.
20 ounce, and then charge X amount,
Right.
40 ounce, and see, we talked about that, we talked about not having carts, but put them in bags, and you charge for the bags, and you talked, this was before we even got this far.
Right.
We talked about what's practical and what is not practical.
So it was felt that this was what's
My
practical.
recollection was to start here and then work your way, if you could do weekly right away, that'd be great. And then go into composting and have education and then work toward a really reduction in waste streams, which will save you tipping fees long term. That was kind of
I think the
big picture. I remember that. I think you led that discussion somewhat.
Thank you for remembering.
Yes.
The thought of going from weekly to bi-weekly, or bi-weekly to weekly on the recycling, is there a pretty good feel on your part, Leanne, that they would fill up weekly?
Yes,
Yeah.
I absolutely, yes.
So right
Seems like
now
that
what
would help
happens
with the
is that
outside.
the excess goes into the refuse, or it goes into bags alongside of the carts? I'm talking about carts because I just recall rarely ever filling up my blue cart or whatever I call it, the recycling cart.
We have families that have multiple carts.
For recycling,
For recycling and still items next to it
okay,
every other week.
all right.
We have people who, for whatever reason, and they're legit reasons, are resistant to buying carts, and will have several half dozen blue bins.
I understand the problem if you don't go to a cart.
Yeah, no, I don't have any, for some people, yes. I would say for a very large portion of the people, they could easily put full or nearly full on a weekly basis.
On a weekly
We end
basis.
up having to throw it in the trash.
Or people
Be more
will make
aggressive.
trips to us and
Unless
use
that's
the
drone
center
drone
bags.
delivery.
I'm just concerned, I mean, I agree, I would like to get started talking about should we go to weekly recycle and enhanced alien. But I'm just concerned that, because the last time we talked, I think a couple of us were like, we need to understand the budgetary impact. We need to understand what the current budget is and what the savings and increase in costs would be. And what I'm getting is that these are specifically the change in the village portion for refuse collection is showing a reduced cost in a couple instances, but that we're not actually going to realize those reduced costs. So that's concerning me that this number, the 9854, really isn't 98. So I mean, that's really what we were trying to get to. So that's concerned.
Well,
It's almost a too attractive number.
Well, if I could make a suggestion, maybe if we could come up with a couple of, we certainly need the status quo, right? And maybe we say, pick a couple combinations, so 1, 2, or 3 possible, and then have an answer of, so for example, we would say enhanced alley weekly recycle. Okay, and really what is that going to mean budgetarily? You know, is that really going to be a savings?
Right now, or
no, I don't think so, because.
well, if I may interject just a second, the primary difference between current service level and enhanced alley is the presumption that the route collectors will save 1 hour each per day on collections. So that's what moves that number. That decision is not going to change your overall vacation patterns, it's not going to change your staffing levels, it's not going to change the total administrative allocations. You know, so, well, they're built into all those equations on an hourly basis to give context. You know, they're just not evaporating.
What you mean, those guys?
Because it's a very subtle difference.
They're still going to be here, they're just going to be doing other things.
They'll be doing more things, yes.
So, but I mean, this implies that we could do weekly recycle and enhanced alley. You get my point. It's not really going to be a budgetary savings.
So you're looking at, take a DPW budget, real high level budget, drop in weekly enhanced, and then so how many people you really put the real length, you're going to lose one person and you'll have maybe one
unless you contract out all services.
Okay, well then that's run that number and
Right,
see what
exactly.
the DPW budget looks like.
Like the real budget is what we were trying to do the other day.
So perhaps this is, the down and dirty way is assume that it's from a cash basis, it's going to use that 318 number.
It's the same number, right.
So that helps I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's going to be reasonably close to that. Because that's just how the metrics work. So whatever savings are on the refuse, those costs are still going to remain. They're just going to be put to other areas. So if that helps you make an analytical decision on cost to substitute that 318 number instead of, I think that would be a good proxy.
The 280, 790.
I didn't understand on option 2.
And then it's $38,000.
On the weekly recycle, John's, you do the current, it's 266,000 minus 40,000, so they would charge 226,000 for the current with the bins and that. And it drops to 192 in the combined, with savings of 32,000 John's provides by moving in the alley enhanced alley. And they're doing it weekly. So there's a savings when you go from current, to get rid of the bins to the carts. And then I'm looking at the bi-weekly waste management, it's 156,000 for the current, and the costs actually go up when you enhance the service. and you get rid of the bins, it goes up 43,000. Why does it go up when we're getting rid of the bins?
That's different companies, different methodologies on bidding. Those are the bids we
And
have.
John's, what was John's? I mean, they seem pretty good pricing on them usually. I mean, because under the enhanced weekly alley, waste management's at 189,000 and John's is at 192,000 per weekly. You're picking up weekly at only an increase in $2,000.
Mr. Mayor, I'm Brian Youngich, I'm with John's, president of John's Disposal.
Excellent.
It's kind of like Marshall McLuhan.
Just a couple things. I mean, one thing is, you know, the alderman here was talking about doing incentives so people do a better job of recycling. The weekly cart, it just kind of does it. I don't know that you have to do much more than give them a big can of weekly. And you mentioned the whole Amazon thing. I mean, it's major. We're starting to get more and more communities that want it just because of the boxes, pretty much. You know, we used to everything was in a box. Now it's in a box that's bigger than a box. Right. And so, and having the weekly, you don't have, your residents don't have to be quite as aggressive, just smashing everything. And when you're every other week, I mean, you almost have to like jump on that thing, right, to get even your milk jugs and your just everything. If you come weekly, it just kind of fits in there. So we have found that when it's you give them the room and they fill it, and then the cost-wise, when you do it weekly, I mean, we move quite a bit faster through the village because we find there's a lot of residents that will still put it out every other week, but for them, even if it's a little more money, they can pick which week it is, and if they miss a week, it's not a month. So we find a lot of people still put it out every other week, but they, you know, they just pick their own weeks, right? So that's the advantage to the thing, and so, and we've got several communities that have gone to it, and when we move a lot faster when it's every other week, they're overloaded and there's more spilling and it slows us down a little bit. So that's, and we've got experience with it. We have multiple communities that do it now weekly, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for identifying.
How long will you let me stand
Who's this person to your right?
This is my wife.
Oh my gosh, you really get the award. Right?
Very interesting.
Trash talk. The bicycles was interesting too.
Is there any way we can like narrow down our choices, kind of like we did last time? So like, if we all agree we want to go to parks, maybe that would help. We might not all agree, but if we did, it might give a little better direction. Sounds like.
Actually, I'd like to ask Leanne to say, what she would like to narrow it down to too, if you have any comments on it.
Well, you know, I think just from the perspective of being able to focus that discussion or review, you know, the two big kind of pots are you interested in outsourcing collections? I mean, that's, you know, the one answer.
Are you talking about both collections?
Yeah,
or?
yeah. Do you want the village to remain in the collections business? That's probably the biggest question that needs to be answered.
And that would be the garbage collection.
Right, and from there, it all, you know, you self-select half of the night.
Right.
And then, on one scenario or the other. And then the other question would be, you know, which service level do you want to provide?
And that would be enhanced versus LA versus not enhanced, and weekly versus.
Well, I mean, I think really the big question becomes,
And then it's in the alley or
if you make that first choice, either way, are we in the collections business or are we not anymore? And then you look at what service level do we want? I think I heard you say that, you know, the full automation thing is probably not something we're ready to talk about, so maybe that comes off the table. And then you're at the discussion of the pros and cons of just doing it the way we're doing it now, or moving to what we call enhanced alley. But honestly, I think the elephant in the room, the biggest discussion that moves a lot of this off the table is, do you want to stay in the collections business? Do you want our staff to continue to provide those services?
So what are the pros and cons in your mind of staying in it or not staying in
Well, I'll give you a couple, and I think Joel's our, you know,
I'd love to hear from both.
he's the operations guy, so his are even more valuable. I think personally, in the time that I've been doing this job and some of the interactions that we've had with waste management, I believe current contractor, we provide better customer service, hands down. Which is not to say that they do not provide good customer service. It's just that when it is our staff, Joel and I have control. If we miss a cart, if a resident puts it out late, if something happens, we can go back, and we can go back immediately, presuming, you know, if we have equipment issues, there are issues, we take care of them, we figure out a way you know, to make it work, to use different people, to use different equipment. You know, currently with our recycling contract, if that driver calls in sick, we might not get pickup that day. If one of our drivers calls in sick, well, there's a forester doing garbage, there's a mechanic doing garbage, there's a utility guy doing garbage. It gets done, no matter what. There's absolutely no question. I think in the last history that anyone around can remember, there have been 2 days that we have not done refuse collection. That was those days a couple years ago where with the wind chill it was 40 below zero. Where it was simply not safe to do it. We have never not done collection because of weather, because of anything. We do it. And to me, that, you know, that's the primary customer service issue there. We have that control and we can do that. Operationally, I think if we're very honest, you know, there is always things that we can do. We have an aging infrastructure and it takes a lot of time and a lot of resource to maintain. And if we were able to keep a staffing level of 19 and did not have to do collections, our infrastructure would be in much better shape than it is.
Okay. Joe?
I would agree with most of those things. And I was just, while Leanne was talking, I was thinking, I'm like, you know, how many days I thought to myself, man, I wish I didn't have to have 3 guys picking up garbage today. I could go do this, you know, to address a different problem. But, you know, customer service, I'm definitely on the same page there. I think we can provide a top-notch program with that. Keeps us, you know, in control of things. You know, there's a lot of different opinions on, I guess, if, you know, what are the core services that a Department of Public Works should maintain. You know, the reality is you can contract out anything. You know, obviously you need to be willing to pay for those things. One of the things, I guess, you know, if I had my gist in all of it, you know, if we can get to a point where we can utilize carts and not have additional items outside of the cart, that would be great operational. Reason being, it's very hard to regulate. Nobody ever has 2 or 3 or 3 to 5 pieces of refuse outside their cart. They have 10 bags, and it's expected that it's picked up, you know. And yeah, you can, you know, try to train and, you know, urge the residents to follow the ordinance. But the reality is, if you're in the garbage business, pick it up. It's a lot less time being spent, you know. You know, and I think it becomes an aesthetic thing too. And if you look down some of these streets early morning, you know, it doesn't look good, you know. And from a perspective of a guy that picks it up every day, you know, we do it semi-mechanically. You know, all we have to do is roll a cart to a truck. You get a pile of bags or debris next to it. Now I got to roll a cart to the truck, tip the cart, roll it back, go back, pick up bags if I can carry them all. You know, so those kind of things really, you know, if we can get to that point of no outside items outside of a cart, I think we can really find some efficiencies in our operation.
Well, and the interesting thing is, if we keep it in-house and we realize some of those efficiencies in collections, then we can start also realizing the increased service to infrastructure support and other stuff. if we're outsourcing solid waste collection, and it gets more efficient because we change behavior, we're not getting anything else, right? So from my perspective, I'd like to see it try to do both, keep it in-house and drive that change in behavior to increase that efficiency, allowing then those people to have more than just a few hours a week to do other things, but keep current staffing level, current service level, and with regards to solid waste, and hopefully be able to do more. The other thing, Mr. President, if I might, just leave. I was getting at Josh Liberatore, who's the chairman of our conservation committee. He prepared the memo. He also had some. I know he's had a lot of conversations Leanne with you about solid waste, and I just wanted to see if he had any comments from the committee's perspective. But
well, I just want to point out that none, in terms of garbage, none of the contractors came in for less than what the DPW is doing. So I'm not, so I wonder if there's anyone who feels that it's worth contracting out for garbage collection. Because I don't feel that, I mean, I think it's best to keep staff on and have enough of the staff in the winter time to be able to respond to and get the streets plowed. If people get real sensitive, if it takes us till 2 p.m. to just plow the streets. I would prefer to keep garbage in-house and do that ourselves. So if we can make that decision, that really narrows it down. That's Leanne.
I support that. I would love
What do other communities, North Shore communities do? Any of them contract out?
Volunteer in Glendale.
I'm sorry?
Volunteer in Glendale.
And Bayside doesn't do their own garbage.
Oh, they just went from driveway to River Hills also contracts, but they use Johnson. So, Bayside, I'm not sure.
As long as the, trustee, I'm sorry, as long as I knew that, like, the $98 was the actual, or whatever, that was the actual cost for village staff and for that service, then I feel pretty comfortable too. But I think I'm confident that that's the cost, although some of the discussions might maybe think a little differently. So I don't know what to request, but I would feel comfortable if that was the number and it's lower than whatever everybody else can provide. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we believe that that's representative of the parameters that have been described.
Yeah.
This is amazing, this cost.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Mark, but that, I mean, the fact that our residents are getting, I mean, that we're all getting this on a yearly basis for under $100, this level of service is absolutely amazing. Anyway, what were you going to say, sir?
I'm just saying, we really tried to approximate the amount of time and effort and resources that have to put into refuse as honestly as we can. And there will be some savings depending on whether you're going to stick with current levels or enhanced alley, and some of that will be redirected to other efforts. And again, there's all sorts of hypothetical savings or costs or issues on behavior if you choose to change the recycling from biweekly to weekly. And if that reduces tonnage, I don't foresee it being too terribly much of a stretch to recover those allocated costs that are now being redirected to other areas. And as far as the 2017 budget goes, my recommendation is the 2017 budget has been processed. We'll deal with any budget variances as it comes and give you some better estimates for the 2018 budget based on the service levels board decides to provide.
So 2018 is going to happen?
It will.
When would
That
be able
does
to
a
do
full
that?
size.
I think we were talking about that the other day, or if we were able to decide on a contract in November, or when does it?
I thought we said September
Well,
1st.
it depends on what service level you choose. If we say full automation is off the table, then it's just a point, it's really just the time it takes to negotiate and sign that contract.
So it could be 2017?
No, definitely.
But not January 1st.
Not January 1st.
No, probably not.
So I know we're not taking a vote, but I can just speak for myself that I like the enhanced alley option and the weekly recycling. I think it's a huge value.
I do too.
Well, why don't we have staff relook at the numbers with the simplifications that we're talking about here with the
Actually,
Are those the hard numbers that
Keep them
you'd
in-house
like us
for
to
the-
bring back next time? For enhanced alley weekly?
sharp
And
pencil.
budget,
Split.
budget impact one that we talked
Yeah,
about.
again, I
Budget
think,
status quo, I mean, just so we know
yeah.
what status quo is, and then, yeah, definitely enhanced weekly, I mean, full
Okay.
automation, we're not gonna do.
And I'd kind of like to see it on the screen.
We can do that. And without so many options, I'll be able to
Forget-
hopefully make it a
And
little easier to follow.
thank you so much. I mean, I really,
Yeah, what an effort.
you've really considered so many things, so I really, really do appreciate this because it makes it so much easier.
And thanks for your comments, Stan and Joel, too. That was helpful.
And thank you for coming
Mr.
tonight. That was
Johnson.
really, really helpful.
He might wanna withdraw his bid after.
Forget it.
One thing I've been thinking about is this, without having the extra bags for the garbage, I mean, that's gonna be controversial for you, but in my opinion, when we have switched these communities over, those extra bags, I don't know what you guys, but if you would go and open those bags up, I'm gonna say 9 times out of 10, there's just recycling in there that's not being recycled, so that's why there's extra garbage.
Yeah.
So this program will force people to do a better job of recycling. But there has to be a plan somewhere to go when people clean out, what are you gonna do when they clean out the garage? And they can bring that, I suppose, or that's still the
It's an
village.
attachment.
So you have to have an answer for that, but I think your rationale to angry citizens, that why don't you just take it all as well, it's about recycling. And I know you're gonna get some of those calls if you make this change. But you guys are tough, you're not afraid of controversy, right?
No.
Okay. All right, I think we're finished talking this subject. So, what's next? Community Development Authority.
Mark is just going to do these updates quickly on
Thank you.
upcoming CDA meetings and regarding the fiscal agency for the CDA.
Okay, new topic. As self-explanatory, now we're going to be transferring some funds to the CDA. The CDA is going to request that the village be their fiscal agent and basically do everything that we're doing today, except now we've got 2 piles of money. To make that effective, compliant with various accounting standards, different audit issues, the village and the CDA need to draft an understanding of how that's going to work, that they're going to be required to act as a formally with this agreement, approve things. They're going to make sure they're compliant with the terms of the transfers. They're going to make sure that we're talking about issues of insurance and audit requirements, and those are all outlined in the draft of the memorandum of understanding that's currently working its way through the CDA. I don't think there's going to be a lot of substantial changes other than what you see here, but this is not to spring it on the trustees when it comes up for consideration. So really just an opportunity to look at this, review, If you see any real challenges with this document, staff would like feedback. But we believe this is really more of an administrative matter, just to set forth the parameters that the village will act as the fiscal agent for the CDA, the CDA's requirements, the village's responsibilities, and then of course, separating those transferred funds from the rest of the activities that the CDA may have recommendations on to the board, that those still remain separate issues.
What drove the February 17th date?
That was the day that the board approved the transfers from the CDA joint meeting.
Okay, and what's the timing that we're thinking that we want the CDA to do this, and then it comes back to this board?
November 3rd, 7th,
November 7th, what?
it comes back to your board.
November 7th, it comes back to our board. Okay. This board. Thank you.
And remember, Mark's memo, based on your request, this is only for monies transferred for that February 17th. This does not include tip 3, 4, and 5. Or any new tips in the future.
And that text actually, in the second paragraph in the memo, actually is inserted into the MOU, so it's clear.
Yeah, I like that too.
What was that again?
Put the second paragraph of the cover memo.
I tried putting that in the, I can put it, yeah, I can move it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I can move it to
the
the
scope of the MOU is.
Who's the primary author of this?
I am.
I have a question about the facade improvement and business loan program. Currently, this references the programs as they're currently written. For example, in facade, if it's over 25,000, I believe we said that would have to come to the board for approval. But I mean, this money that we're giving to the CDA, we're giving to the CDA, so.
But they have to be compliant with the programs as adopted by the board, so that's, I mean, that's, again, that's.
But it's their money to spend, so why?
Well, but I'm not going to write a check for something that exceeds.
Huh?
So I'm not going to write a check out for a $50,000 facade grant that hasn't received board approval. That's contrary to the program requirements adopted by the board. That's, again, why I have to start wearing two hats, which is why we need this agreement. So they will have facade money to implement in accordance with the facade program, and if those program requirements require board approval, it still requires board approval, no matter where the funding is. And the same thing with the business loan.
I mean, they're a separate entity, we're giving them this money as a separate entity. I mean, we have no control over this.
But they're going to agree to abide by the terms of this agreement, which means that they're going to agree to abide by the terms of the programs as adopted by the board.
And it says in here, I believe you inserted it, that if any changes were made to these programs.
It has to go to the
it has
board.
to go to the board.
Yeah.
Maybe you should change it. We asked about the CDA. I don't know if that helps.
I mean, certainly, I mean, this is required, but certainly at the staff level, I don't want to be stuck in a tug of war with anybody. So I think this document really defines the parameters. You know, the programs are already adopted by the board. Any changes in the programs will have to be adopted by the board. They need to follow the terms of the programs, and that's in terms of everything that they're agreeing to as well. So it should be pretty clear direction for staff on how to administer as their fiscal agent those funds.
Trustee Rosie.
So for the fiscal agent, I mentioned this in CDA and maybe just here so you can think about it before we vote, but we are now creating a fiscal agent. Marcus, we're going to pay for the CDA back to staff for staff time for us to handle that. I know that all the loan proceeds are addressed to come into, so we can hold on to them and disperse them. Could we do the same thing for facade? Like, can we just do the check writing in-house so it's very clear that you are our fiscal agent for the CDA?
And that would take away from the bid?
No,
doing that?
they wouldn't have to write the checks, but they would still be the marketing administrator, review the applications, all that, which I think is where the CDA is.
Really, whatever the CDA and the village board approves is what I will follow.
Anyways, so that was my request at CDA.
But that doesn't impact this, what's gonna become for us.
And that's good.
Right,
Yeah.
so that was a suggestion.
It could be made more clear, like it's very spelled out for the loan program.
So you're
So there could
requesting
be,
a change to the MOU?
there could be additional language, correct, just specifying that.
So the MOU or to the facade program?
Facade program, not that one.
The facade program, I understood you to say that you wanted to change the facade program from being bid administered to
No.
staff administered?
Nope, that went down in flames. So they can still administrate it. I'm just asking about the check writing, bringing in the financial aspect of it. The actual, look at the invoice, write a check. Once the bid has said, this application meets all the standards. That's what we're doing. for the
That's
loan
more of a
program.
policy thing with the CDA and the board.
Facade program, so. Not an animal.
Okay, I mean, because it discusses the loan program and writing checks in the MOU here, but that's fine.
I mean, obviously the CDA will also have another track with this and the board. I mean, again, just trying to outline
Okay.
what I see as the critical issues, and if we need additional language, we can certainly incorporate that as well. At some point in time, if staff is asked to do more support work than they're currently doing, then, you know, it's certainly something that I would talk with Chris about, seeing if the reimbursement for village staff time is still at appropriate levels, but.
And does that say that in MOU, like that allows us to?
Well,
review
it
that?
says that it's going to be this based on the current programs as adopted. So, and again, if we wanted to amend it after we adopt it, we would amend it.
Just like any agreement
Yeah.
between two parties.
No. I might, I'm not sure if I want to split this hair, but one of the changes you made to this MOU, in section 10 miscellaneous, you say any modifications to the facade program or business, including the loan program, must be approved by all parties.
The parties are defined in the earlier language as a village and CDA.
It was
Specified CDA and the village board.
Well, if this board
Yeah.
wants to make a change in either of those, in the facade program, let's say, and the CDA and/or bid doesn't want to agree to that,
The bid's not part of the agreement here.
Both parties, two parties.
it's just us and
It's just the two of us. We
But
hire
you're right, the
in.
CDA.
But if the CDA doesn't
no.
want to agree to
Right.
what we want to change, again, I might be bringing something up that might not.
You're right. You have to
Well,
get out.
that jumped out at me.
Well, the language would be that if the board, the CDA agrees to accept any changes dictated by the board, passed by the board, that it would be essentially a one-way street.
What is it now? I mean, is there a change from what it is now? That's where you're getting at, like, are we losing that ability? Right now, what does it say?
Well, if you wanted to eliminate, what you're saying, if you want to eliminate, the board wants to eliminate the facade program, under, what you want is they can, because then they don't have the CDA to.
We can do what we want.
But the money's still,
Decision should be here.
The
money's still there though, when you do.
Well, if they eliminate the facade program, then the CDA just went to the facade and then keep it in their fund, so the board would say, please do the facade program.
Okay.
Is the CDA going to provide an annual budget for the use of the funds? Like, is there going to be any budgetary information from the CDA?
I'm sure the CDA will continue with their annual reports to the board, which includes their forecasting projection.
So but that's going to have to include all the information about the loan and any budgeting for a facade improvement. I mean, it's going to have to be a more involved budget than this much to Jim Plaisted and this much for marketing.
Well, I think now that they will have specific funds that need to be administered, that is a natural conclusion.
Well, there'll be actually less categories under, I mean, really, you have facade and,
Well, right now, it's all kind of
so there'll be a lot less
integrated into this
numbers under the new system.
broader scope plan, forecast projections. But certainly part of that is providing to the board updates on the business improvement loan program, the facade program. I mean, I don't see that the nature of that
Well, the
changing.
budget would, there's less things to budget, but you can always report on many as much as you want.
So are reports in the actual facade required to the board, or do we need to add reports to have reports section to say in reports will be provided?
I mean, I would like updates on how this money's actually being spent.
Beyond the audit percent.
Yeah, like what they're planning.
Was in that part of
I mean,
it.
are they planning $300,000 in 1 year, or is it gonna be a, you know?
Well, obviously, you have staff liaisons on the CDA, and the CDA has to approve these items, so I think it's anecdotally, it's going to be fairly transparent. What metric you want the CDA to report to the board is.
Transparent and CDA are not words that I normally associate with each other, but I would appreciate some reporting, regular reporting to the board.
Well,
Would that go in the facade grant as well, or would that go in the?
Well, we're talking about program issues, and what's before
Yeah.
us is just the MOU. And we're not acting on this now.
Yeah, let's move on.
Now, we want to make sure you are aware of that before they have 2 meetings of CDA.
Well, just-
before they pass
I mean,
it.
quite honestly, if the CDA brings forward an MOU that the village board is not going to support, I mean, that's problematic. So, contact Peter Hammond with your suggestions, and we'll take it from there, I guess. Again, I just
Or you can
lay the foundation to this.
Trustee Bachhorst and Trustee Rosick who are on the CDA.
Either way.
Okay, let's move on. Next item on the agenda is reports from village officials. The only one I have is just a reminder, you've got the notice this week that we're going to have our budget hearing and consideration scheduled for Monday, November 14th at 6:30 for the 2017 budget.
So when is it?
Monday, November 14th. You got it, you received a...
Okay, you're right, okay. We have a meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, we have a meeting tomorrow, but that's not the hearing.
Tomorrow is it 5:30 or 6?
6.
So anybody else have any,
Briefly, we did have our resolution on supporting total removal of the Esserbrook Dam. You saw that, hopefully you saw it, I mentioned it last time, that they might be doing the property swap. There was the first meeting before the district, the MMSD budget committee, that went forward. There will be 2 meetings. There will be 1 meeting with Milwaukee next week, and then back to the full MMSD commission. So hopefully we'll see that come down in the near future.
any other reports?
I just wanted to ask about Halloween, our Halloween on the 30th. There were a couple of neighborhoods on the west side who had asked, what street was it? Woodburn? Yeah, who had asked, given the crowds that tend to come to certain streets, whether there would be enhanced police to help with pedestrian safety and that kind of thing.
I brought that up in committee.
Okay, and I don't know if we ever talked to the chief, got an answer back on whether that was something that was going to be possible to do or not.
I was going to talk to him tonight again, to get more answers, but he wasn't here today. So maybe Kristen.
The chief is out, but I will.
Okay, thank you. Any other reports? Yes,
some review of policy that might impact updating the handbook. So that might be done, you know, over the next couple of months. And then it was, I met with Chris and Nathan, and it was thought that once the handbook is updated, then we meet with the chairs of the committee, or the committees, because we have a lot of turnover and new appointees, that that would be a great time to get everybody on board about different policies and responsibilities, so, and open meetings and things like that. The Elder Services Advisory Board, Elizabeth Price wanted to let me know, and I thought I would share it here, that they are trying to recruit a board member with investment or finance expertise and interest in
For which board?
Elder Services Advisory Board. And my power strip doesn't work, so I don't know if there's some special. I don't know how to turn it.
I'm not you turn them off to save them.
Oh, well, there you go. So
That's
that's
straight.
easy.
We saw that one.
You don't have to, you could put it in there, because somebody else can. That's all I have, thank you. Oh, no, that's item for future consideration.
Any other reports? Items for future consideration? Oh,
You have a report.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if this is a report or not. The by-board meeting?
That's a report.
Okay, I think we settled on November 2nd. Is that right?
Well, it's a
Yes.
combination report.
That's a Wednesday.
Yeah, I can't remember if we pinned down the time.
We did.
Couldn't see another
I think 9.
email on that.
We will,
I
yeah.
have to,
We should let the, so we can put that on the committee.
Yes,
If there's only two of you, then we don't need to, but.
Well, no,
We
we
should-
will, I'm sure that
we should notice it, and I need to secure a spot for it. Thank you for remembering.
Okay. Reports from village manager. Yes.
Are we on future agenda items?
Not yet.
Okay.
I forgot some.
Okay.
I forgot the village manager.
I don't have anything about this.
Okay. I wasn't trying to treat you like a child.
That's fine, I have chocolate tonight, that's how I feel, so.
Okay, items for future consideration.
I'll let Stan go.
Yes.
Oh, I see, it's a trend here.
Procedure.
Okay. So I have 3. I'm hoping that sometime in the future we could get a presentation on recycling and refuge programs from other communities that have achieved modification in behavior, so less garbage, more recycling. And did they use a carrot or did they use a stick? Did they charge for something, or did they entice it? Just to get a feel of what's worked around the nation or even internationally, just to see if we want to explore any of those options. The next
Might
one.
work for the conservation.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then at some point, I'd just like, and maybe this is getting to your thing, but an explanation of committee chairs, liaisons to commissions, what the rights, responsibilities, and staff interaction is. I still have questions about that, so it would be good just to get the update of what it is. And then the last is an update on liquor license discussions regarding our staff efforts to obtain additional liquor licenses from surrounding communities or some sort of zone or something that we had mentioned in the past.
Yep. I can give a report real quick. Under manager report, Nathan is working on the entertainment district. I did call the state and they said we just have to have an ordinance that fits the state law. And 2, we're working with the city of Milwaukee now. Ag Nation agreed to talk to some folks at the Milwaukee and try to get some response. So he's got it so far, and they have never thought of it yet. So they have to put a policy in place that the city wants.
And the entertainment district will allow more licenses?
Only in that one area where the Metro Mark, the other one.
They changed state law basically to accommodate Green Bay, that area around the stadium, because they were out of liquor licenses. So they created this, if you fit this criteria and you have this type of development and these extremely narrow parameters within this so many acres or square feet, you can have more. And so we may
false stadium.
Not your market, we have saved the village.
So that's why I have to, but I can put it in
Ryan Boulevard. Okay, any other items for future consideration? Yes.
Yeah, JP&L had some discussion of sample ordinances for food trucks, and I wanted to put that back on, just so Rose, I could ask about it. I don't know what happened to it, but it's
Great. Yeah, let's do that.
it's a winter discussion.
We have
There's a lot of interest.
all the information that was
Exactly.
installed in the committee.
Okay, any other items?
Yes, I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Good morning.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead. We'll save the rest for last. That's me.
Oh.
You go.
Oh, I have one too.
I think either next meeting or the meeting after next, like Josh or some representative from the Conservation Committee to give us a report on what we learned on village-wide composting and organics collection. I think it fits nicely, and it's with your comments on best practices and behavior changes, and I think it can be done separate from that kind of longer term stuff. There was a presentation by a contractor who's doing a pilot at the city of Milwaukee, and I think there's some real good data and information that we can take into consideration.
I'd like an update on prior items that have been put forward as future agenda items, and whether there's any follow-up or action related to items that trustees have already brought up.
And what time period, from when to when?
Well, I think it would be useful, and I started to do this myself, to keep a listing of items that trustees have brought up, and then some of them have been addressed and many have not. But I think rather than us just throwing things out at the end of the meeting, it would be nice to have some follow-up and some actual documentation.
So for like a week from a year ago?
Sure.
Thank you for the segue into my item.
Well, just meant to say that one would, who would be able to take a look at that? Would you be able to take a look at items for future consideration?
If it's on the minutes,
If
sure.
it's on the minutes. Well,
You can't help it.
and don't
Elections.
I was just thinking about timing wise, if you want to get for the next meeting, it's going to be highly unlikely for me to go.
No, it doesn't have to, no, it doesn't have to be. But I mean, we throw out a lot of things, and some things happen and some things we never hear again, and some things get repeated over and over again. So it would be just nice to have a listing of it. It doesn't have to be for the next meeting.
Trustee Pop first.
So this is a popular topic here. So I just wanted, well, I'm going to give a little data and I'll be succinct, hopefully. I was looking, there's information available online of the municipalities in the state of Wisconsin and when their trick-or-treating, Halloween trick-or-treating is conducted. And I just thought some of you would be, this would be fun to do a little trivia night here, or our guests, but just a big picture. 83% of the municipalities, of the 179 from which we have data, have trick-or-treating after 4 p.m., beginning after 4 p.m. And of the 3 nights, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, Monday happens to be Halloween. This is for 2016, mind you. 61% of the municipalities, that being 109 of 179, are conducting trick-or-treating on Halloween proper. And then 26 on the Sunday before, and 13 on the Saturday before. And then just quickly to break it down, those doing it on Saturday, it's 70% of the municipalities that are conducting trick-or-treating on Saturday are beginning at 4 p.m. or after. And then those on Sunday, it's half and half. So just to let everyone know.
Is there a breakdown on which ones those
I
are?
have those.
Large
Oh, and
communities-
curious.
Large communities or large cities? Urban versus.
There is a breakdown, doesn't give the demographic information, but we can extrapolate that, of course. But interestingly, for the Sunday, 1 to 3 p.m., there's only one municipality, and 1 to 4, there are 9 municipalities, and one of those being Shorewood. And this is just some phonetics here, some phonetic similarity. Shorewood, I'm sorry, does it noon to 2 on Saturday. Shorewood, 1 to 4 on Sunday, and Shorewood Hills always has it on Halloween afternoon to 8 p.m. dusk. So just so yes, I think it's quite interesting that our ICC recommended the 1 to 4 on Sunday. But unless I don't have all the data from other municipalities,
suggested that we start preparing earlier for the discussion.
I would.
I didn't think we'd this
A whole year. So this year, I would actually like to see this come up on the agenda prior to, right, when we have to make a decision whether or not we're gonna have trick or treating. So thank you, trustee Amenta, as an item for future consideration. I think this does warrant, not just this data, we could get better data, but a more robust and perhaps fact-based discussion on potentially offering the trick or treating during evening hours, whether it be on Halloween or another time.
Thank you. Any other items for future consideration? Or motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Adjourn.
All right.